Okay, ready?
Yes.
Hey guys, welcome back to Nearly by Nature. Today we have a very special guest here today. We have Meaza, who is a human rights defender, and she's going to be discussing the genocide that happened in Tigray in 2020. Thank you so much, Meaza, for being here today. I really wanted to have this conversation with you because I know that a lot of people are not educated on what happened to Tigray in 2020 and the genocide that happened there, and then the aftermath of that genocide and the humanitarian crisis that is currently happening right now. So, why don't you first tell us just a little bit about that genocide and how it occurred in 2020?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you sharing your platform to shed light onto what's happening to the people of Tigray. Tigray is a region. I'll share my screen and show you the map just so people have a better understanding of what I'm talking about. As you can see on the map, this is Tigray here, the one that's highlighted in blue, and this is Eritrea, the country, and Tigray is a region on the northernmost part of Ethiopia, the second largest country in Africa. Beginning November 2020 of course, November 4th of 2020, the Ethiopian federal government in coalition with the Eritrean government and local forces waged a genocidal war against the people of Tigray that has resulted in the deaths and a massacre of over 800,000 civilians. And this primarily happened because of political disagreements and disagreements that could have been resolved through a roundtable discussion have resulted in the catastrophic humanitarian crisis and suffering of over 6 million people currently in Tigray.
What led up to this genocide, and how were these leaders able to get the population to turn on the people of Tigray? Like, what tactics did they use to actually get people on board to invade Tigray and commit this genocide? Because Tigray is essentially part of Ethiopia, correct?
Yes, yes, it is. Thank you for that question. It's a very important question. And like I alluded to on my first discussion, the two leaders, this is the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, and the one with glasses is the Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki, who has been in power since the beginning of or the Eritrean independence from Ethiopia. So both leaders colluded together in order to plan and orchestrate the Tigray genocide. And there are so many reasons that we could give, but at the core of the Tigray genocide is this disagreement on how Ethiopia should look like going forward. So there is a fundamental difference on the Ethiopian state building process. The Ethiopian Prime Minister believes Ethiopia should be administered under a unitarist government with only a single person having all the power, while the people of Tigray and many other ethnic groups in Ethiopia believe that Ethiopia needs to be a federal state which recognizes the innate differences people have in the country. Ethiopia is a very big country and it's diverse. It is home to over 80 different languages and different ethnic groups and different religions are practiced throughout the country. So the people of Tigray have fought against a military dictatorship we had that was overthrown from power in 1991. And at the cost of that struggle or that revolution was this burning desire to have your right self-determination and self administration respected. And after 17 years armed struggle, that fundamental democratic right was enshrined in the Ethiopian constitution, and through that fundamental right, people across Ethiopia were able to be administered by people that they voted for, people they elected for, and people who come from their own ethnic identity and background. So because of that constitutional right, Tigrans who live in Tigray were able to speak their language, go to school and learn in their language, go to courts and be administered or get justice through their language. And the same thing was true for every other ethnic group in Ethiopia. But once this prime minister came to power in 2018, he wasn't elected. He came to power because the prime minister who was prior to him resigned. So the Ethiopian, People's Revolution Front, or called EPRDF, it was a coalition party, appointed him to prepare the country for an upcoming election that was supposed to take place in 2020 September. However, like many other, dictators across the world, the prime minister used COVID-19 as an excuse to further erode democracy and stay in power unconstitutionally. So the people of Tigray said, we're aware of COVID, but we're going to take all precautionary measures and still exercise our democratic and constitutional right. And so they went ahead and had their regional or state level election. This angered the Ethiopian prime minister, and he invaded Tigray. He made sure Tigray was encircled by forces from local, his local allies, specifically the Amhara militias and forces from Eritrea. And so after that, a full-blown, genocide began. Tigray was completely put under communications blockout. No journalists were able to get in, and the Ethiopian community at large was blindsided, or they were pushed into hating the people of Tigray because the prime minister and all the media affiliates run by the government were actively pushing narratives that made the people of Tigray the other within their own community. And so the majority of Ethiopians were made to believe that if Ethiopia is to have a better future, then the people of Tigray needed to be eliminated for once and all, which is why the religious figures, very famous athletes, including, athlete Haile Gebrselassie, who is really renowned on international stage when it comes to running, and other singers, intellectuals, and politicians were actively pushing this narrative of weeding the cancer from the entire community so Ethiopia can be prosperous and developed. So because of that, not only members of the Ethiopian army and members of the Eritrean army, but even ordinary Ethiopians were actively involved in the elimination of the people of Tigray.
Can you just take this image off?
Yes. Sorry.
No, that's okay, because during the interview, I'll have to cut it. In a bit more detail, can you explain how long the genocide in Tigray lasted and what kind of atrocities took place?
Yes, so the genocide is still very much active in my opinion, but at least the guns have been silenced to a degree. So the active military conflict began in November 3rd of 2020, and it lasted all the way until November 2022. And on November 2022, the warring parties, the people of Tigray, led or represented by the Tigray's People's Liberation Front, or TPLF, and the Ethiopian government had signed a cessation of hostilities agreement in Pretoria, South Africa. And after that, the guns have been silenced to a degree, but the extermination of Tigrayans is very much active. And a lot of crimes have happened and they continue to take place at the moment, but we can categorize them into 6. The major one being, the use of rape and sexual assault as a weapon of war. According to the research that myself and many other researchers have conducted, there are over 350,000 young girls and women who have been gang raped by military men from Ethiopia, Eritrea, and other military forces that were fighting alongside the Ethiopian government. And the sexual assault is so horrific in its nature. They didn't just rape them. At times, they would rape a victim in groups, 15 of them at times, and they would rape them for days consecutively for more than 2 weeks. So some of the survivors I have talked to, they horrifically recount their experiences of being raped by like group of military men for over 2 weeks. And they don't just rape them, they rape them, and after they rape them, they fill their reproductive organs with dirt. Some of the survivors I have talked to, they have they put condoms, scissors, and stone and all of this was done in order to ensure that this woman, they don't continue to reproduce to grand men or women. So the ultimate goal in doing this was not really to meet their sexual gratification. It was rather to ensure that these women are not capable or able to reproduce even after the war is stopped. And then the other major crime that was committed was extrajudicial killing of non-combatant Tigrayans. And this happened particularly to Tigrayan men starting the age of 12. They were hunted from door to door, and they were all of them were executed. And of course, it's really difficult to have, an accurate number of how many men were, executed during this period of time, but we fear that it is in hundreds of thousands. And the other major crime that was committed is this looting of Tigrayan resources and destroying public and private infrastructures that the people of Tigray have worked so hard for the past 30 years. If you go to Tigray now, you will find over 78% of the health facilities being completely destroyed and annihilated, and you find schools and healthcare facilities destroyed, and even farmers. Majority of Ethiopians and Tigrayans are agrarian. Many of them are farmers, so their cattle, their cows have been looted and killed. Whatever grain they had saved was looted and taken to Eritrea and Amhara, the neighboring region, and the farmers haven't been even able to plow their lands. And as a result, now they're suffering from a famine because they were not able to plow their lands or to practice agriculture for over 3 years. And the other really horrific crime is this intentional blockade of humanitarian aid to the people of Tigray and using starvation as a war tactic. So Tigray was put under complete siege, and there was no aid that was able to go to Tigray because there wasn't humanitarian corridor provided to the region. And so famine, a man-made famine, was also used as a war tactic, and many people died because of starvation, including some of my family members. And the last crime that was committed is this incarceration and extortion of Tigrayans who live outside of the region. So many Tigrayan professionals who were working and living outside of Tigray, they were fired from their jobs, and many of them were put into concentration camps. Even those who have never been to Tigray, who do not even speak the language, simply by virtue of having that Tigrayan blood in them, were hunted from their homes and put into concentration camps where their human rights were grossly violated, and a lot of them actually ended up dying in those concentration camps. And the other part is the extortion part. Tigrayan businessmen and those who had some sort of wealth and were living outside of the country, their properties were confiscated by the government and they were extorted by civilians and the government. And this was done in order to ensure that no one comes to the risk of the people of Tigray, to make sure that the people of Tigray, even after the conflict is over, are not able to mobilize and support whoever is left behind. So these are some of the crimes that were committed, but I am personally horrified by the amount and the kind of sexual violence that the women of Tigray have sustained, because like I said, we have over 3,000 and 350,000 young girls and women, and this doesn't include the young girls and women who still live in places that are occupied by the Eritrean and Amhara forces. These are only people that live in the liberated parts of Tigray, so you can only imagine how high that number would be. And many of these women haven't had access to any meaningful support. They don't have access to psychological support. They don't have access to healthcare, but many of them have sustained fistula. They have sustained internal bleeding and cervical cancer and many other health issues that we're not able to help them heal from, primarily because Tigray is still very much in dire need. And I want to emphasize how the Ethiopian government single-handedly blocked all of this from the international community by putting Tigray under complete siege. There are no, Ethiopia as a whole only has one telecommunication company and it's owned by the government. So if the government decides, to completely shut off a region, they can simply do it by clicking a button, and they did that, which is why a lot of people were not able to see what actually happened in real time.
Wow. Um, that was a lot, and I think it's a moment to just like process like all of the horror that happened. And I think like right now also what I'm seeing is like people, the new standard of having empathy and compassion for people who are being genocide is like, show me your genocide. Like what we're seeing in Gaza it's actually not normal to watch someone's genocide from your phone. And it's probably one of the main reasons why people are like care is that they're able to see it. And it's so crazy because like the Ethiopian government was able to completely take control of the entire narrative just by cutting off internet access, which is the main reason why people are able to communicate, their suffering. I learned that, some of the horrors that were also happening in Tigray during the genocide was the dehumanization of people in Tigray, where they were forcing um, fathers to rape their daughters, or they were raping children, little girls, in front of the entire community. Um, the main reason the genocide in Tigray came to an end or didn't end was largely due to the mass uprising of the civilian population who fought back against the Eritrean army and the Ethiopian army and effectively pushed them back. How were these everyday civilians in Tigray successfully able to push these armed militias out of their state without being an organized army, without having resources, without having weapons? And what happened after they were able to push these armed forces out of Tigray?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you said about the horrific nature of the raping and is just something out of this world. I have never heard of any military organ that rapes innocent children in front of their entire community. And in Tigray, that's precisely what happened. People were raped in places of worship. Monks were raped in monasteries. Islam sisters that sought rescue in mosque were raped in mosques. It's crazy. Priestesses were forced to rape their own children at a gunpoint. And when they fell, when they refused to do that, they were shot right there and then. And after that, the children were raped by the military. So what happened in Tigray is out of this world. Tigrayans were even burned alive. We had supporters of the Ethiopian government or members of the Amhara community preaching online saying that it's a blessing not only to kill but also to burn Tigrayans and to eat their flesh. These are things that were being pushed for by Eritrea, by Amhara influential businessmen that are so looked up to by the community. So the level of dehumanization that was done is just crazy. And this is primarily because the Ethiopian government was actively using state-owned media stations, radio stations, TV stations, and newsletter to dehumanize the people of Tigray so that it's easy for day-to-day ordinary citizens to commit the kind of heinous crimes that they committed. We were called daytime hyenas, we were called newcomers to the country, we were called cancers that need to be weed out. So these are the kind of language and terminologies that were used to describe the people of Tigray, regardless of our political affiliation. And how the response from the Tigrans to this kind of violence was at the beginning, a lot of us didn't know anything about, like war, because many of us, Tigray and Ethiopia at large, has a young generation. 78% of the population is very young, and we're people who were born after the 17 years armed struggle. So we know how horrific conflicts are, but we have never really been involved in any because Ethiopia had relatively enjoyed a peaceful time for the past 30 plus years. So when the war began, a lot of Tigrayans didn't want to participate because we thought, like the narrative that was being pushed by by the Ethiopian government, we thought this was, conflict between two political parties. So a lot of, the people were hesitant to join, even those of us in the diaspora. But then when we saw the horrific raping of our family members, when we saw the indiscriminate bombardments of our schools and our homes, even kindergarten schools. So we didn't have any other option but to fight back. So a lot of the younger, not only the younger, the educated, the college professors, the doctors, the nurses, the merchants, everyone didn't have any option but to fight back. So when the war began, Tigray only had less than 15,000 special forces or policemen, and this is allowed to do according to the Ethiopian constitution. But after the conflict intensified, every other Tigrayan picked up arms and started to fight. But because Tigray was completely circled because it was under siege, there was no any way to get external help or anything. whereas the Ethiopian government was being supported not only by Eritrean troops, but also with armaments and drones that were funded by countries like Turkey, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. So the people of Tigray, they just started fighting with everything they had, and then they would, capture the Eritrean and Ethiopian forces, and they will take their arms from them, and then they will fight them with that. And then successfully, they had defeated the Ethiopian army. The Ethiopian army never in its history has ever been defeated the way it has been defeated in Tigray. And then they didn't only defeated them, but they pushed them back all the way to the Ethiopian capital. Like the Tigrayan armies, or we call them the Tigray Defense Forces. These are defense forces that were organized after the genocide was waged against the people of Tigray. They successfully pushed this genocidal force like maybe 100 kilometers away from the capital city, which is why the international community, the US government primarily, and European state countries were very much alarmed, and they came to the rescue of the Ethiopian government, and they forced the warring parties to sign a cessation of hostilities agreement on November 2022. But prior to that, they knew everything that was happening. They knew the like despicable level of crimes that were being committed, but they didn't take any meaningful action. It's only when they saw the Tigray Defense Forces actively pushing towards the federal capital, and that they learned the plan was to oust the Ethiopian government that was orchestrating this genocide, and to work towards building a transitional government, an inclusive one, and to have an inclusive political dialogue with all members of the Ethiopia as a country, and to forge a better future. But countries that are so interested in protecting the federal government, the genocidal government, came to its rescue and forced them to sign a cessation of hostilities agreement.
It's interesting how they were able to use rape as a weapon, and the psychological and physical torture that was used on women. And I think we will see the long-term effects of that entire generation of Tigray for generations to come. Like that's not something that would go away. You mentioned that um, these militias were backed by the UAE, Saudi Arabia, other forces. You talked about how the US and European nations had to get involved once Tigray was able to push these militias, 100 kilometers away from Ethiopia's capital. Who are the main players who funded and supported the Tigray genocide? Was there involvement of outside powers, and what benefits did those outside powers gain from funding this genocide?
Yeah, the Tigray genocide, or the Tigray conflict by its nature, is an international conflict because it involved many, many countries, starting from Eritrea, that was deep in Tigray, not only committing all sorts of crimes in Tigray, but virtually, controlling the entire nation alongside the Ethiopian government. And then on top of that, you have military that were invited from Somalia. Even military troops from Somalia actively supported the Eritrean government and fought along them, wearing their uniforms. And then on top of that, a lot of countries, powerful countries on the international stage, have failed the people of Tigray, either through their action or inaction. Some of them provided financial support to the Ethiopian government. Some of them provided diplomatic support for the Ethiopian government. But the prominent ones are countries like UAE, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Eritrea, Russia, and China, who have played a significant role not only in providing diplomatic support, but also actively providing in-kind support to the Ethiopian government, either in terms of training or armaments, including drones that were used to destroy schools, universities, and hospitals. On top of that, you have countries like the US, who knew everything that was happening way before it even began, who could have simply and easily averted the genocide. They failed to avert the genocide, they failed to prevent it, and they failed to stop it before we saw the suffering and the demise of over 800,000 civilians. So these countries provided in-kind and financial as well as diplomatic protection and coverage for the Ethiopian government. And while it's very difficult to accurately speak why they did this, but in my understanding, and this is widely accepted by the Tigrayan and by the Tigrayan community and experts in the international sphere, is because the US in particular is so scared of losing Ethiopia and Africa to China. So because of that fundamental fear, they didn't want to push further the Ethiopian government towards, respecting human rights and stop like ending the genocide, because the Ethiopian government would actively use that card. They say, if you push me hard, if you tell me to do this, to do that, I will go to China. So in a sense, it was a proxy war that was fought between superpowers, but in the middle of it were innocent civilians that paid the ultimate price for it. And I also want to emphasize that I think, enacting foreign policies based on fear is not practical. Like the Ethiopian government is not good for anybody. It's not good for its citizens, and it most definitely will not be good even for the US. So even America's national interest in the Horn of Africa or in Ethiopia would not be met if they continue to support and abide a genocidal government that continues to weaponize the state structure against its civilians. Because now, even after the guns have been silenced, Ethiopia is one of the most unstable and unsafe country. And so, violence has become the new norm in the country. People are suffering everywhere across the board. There are conflicts happening in every, corner you go across Ethiopia. And so I don't understand how unstable country, a very weak government and unstable state is going to meet the national interest of the US. So even from point of self advantage, it wasn't right. It wasn't beneficial to support the genocidal regime, and not even when I look at it, from an American perspective. Although I'm not an American, I think the policy the U.S. government took with regards to Ethiopia is completely wrong, and it will continue to cost them massively in the long run.
So when we're talking about these countries and their benefits of I guess funding this genocide, it's mostly kind of like a war between these superpowers, and the battleground happens to be, Africa. And we're seeing this now also in Gaza, where you're having like the battleground is, the Middle East. What do you draw can you draw connections between that when you're seeing what's happening in Congo and Sudan, and you're seeing the same players over and over? You're seeing the US, you're seeing Israel, you're seeing Saudi Arabia, you're seeing the UAE, these Gulf countries, kind of all backing some of these genocides, but then also like in the media, they're showing that they're in full support of like peace. How do you, as someone who is from Tigray, like one, how are you able to connect these struggles? And two, like how do you respond to that?
I think it's clear that, disenfranchised communities would continue to suffer so long as they don't form some sort of allyship or, some sort of working relationship amongst each other. Either we sing together or we find a way to survive together. And what I see happening across the board, be it in Congo or Sudan or Tigray, is that marginalized communities that have historically, been oppressed continue to suffer because their voices are muffled. They're not on the decision-making tables. They're not in the spaces where conversations about them and for them are being had. So I think as minority groups, and I believe as Africans altogether, or even those in the Middle East, we have to find a way to understand that none of us are free if one of us is not free. So unless we do that, this fight that we do, in our own, echo chambers, is not going to get us anywhere. And for me, I think it's also important, like for the West or for the powerful countries, to understand that unless the fundamental questions of self-determination and autonomy is answered, then whatever sort of, like quick fix they try to come up with would not really last. It would not work. So, I want to highlight that it's really important to have a victim-centered approach to problem solving, whatever it is. If you're trying to fix problems in Africa, if you're trying to solve problems in the West, in the Middle East, make sure you engage the people who live there, the people who are from there, and make sure your solutions are based on the insight you get from them. You can't make decisions for people that you don't know very well. For their culture is different, their way of life is different, their diplomatic and and democratic questions are different. So I think it's really important that the West or whoever is involved in bringing about solution to this, conflicts, whoever is interested in facilitating peace talks or bringing about an end to conflicts, make sure that their approach is centered on the victim, that they listen to the victims, and the victims are all everywhere across the board. I think that that's the one parallel I see common everywhere.
What is the current situation in Tigray today? I know you said that the genocide is continuing, but it's just not like with guns and weapons. And then how would you say, um, what do you think is the most important need for Tigray right now? And how can people help support?
Yeah, the genocidal forces from Ethiopia and Eritrea have so meticulously created a catastrophe that will continue even in their absence, even after their guns are silenced. And what I mean by that is they have destroyed over 78% of the health facilities, so people in Tigray do not have access to healthcare. Many of them are dying due to lack of medication. A lot of the doctors have been either killed, or those who survived the genocide have lost hope and have left Tigray, looking for better life elsewhere. And like I said, the schools have been destroyed. So you have an entire generation that is forced to be illiterate because their schools have been destroyed. So they don't have anywhere to go. And the farmers, most importantly, the farmers have not been able to plow their land. They haven't had access to fertilizer or seed. And so they were not able, to get any sort of crop that they could use to sustain life. And so now Tigray is faced by a famine that is so like catastrophe, and we have 91% of the Tigray population in need of humanitarian aid, but the USAID, the World Food Organization, and other organizations that are supposed to provide this humanitarian aid have halted their services, and so the people don't have anything to depend on.
Wow.
So, Tigray, as we speak, it's a very dark and bleak space for people. But on top
Why
of
have they
that,
halted the food? Why have they halted the food from coming inside?
because during the conflict, although the Ethiopian government had blocked access to Tigray, these organizations have been trying their best to deliver some aid, but they found out that the Ethiopian government had actually used this aid to feed its troops. So in order to, I guess punish the troop or the government, they're punishing the people. So like while I recognize the need and the importance of, making sure aid reaches the beneficiary, it would happen better. And I think it's only logical for USAID and others to find another way of delivering the aid to the people instead of saying, oh, because the genocidal government that committed a genocide on you has, stole some of this aid, I am not going to bring aid anymore. That's precisely what the federal government wants, anyways. They want the people of Tigray to be eliminated either through their guns, the massacres they commit, or through starvation. So in a way, these aid organizations are actually facilitating what the Ethiopian government wants by stopping their aid delivery to the people of Tigray. But that being said, we have grassroots organizations that are doing their very best to provide some sort of, sustenance to the people. And your audience can go to Omna Tigray, OMNAT Tigray.org, where they can see a list of different organizations that they can support in addition to getting educated reports on what's happening to the people on the ground. But in addition to the famine, the entire generation is traumatized. Like we don't have any expertise to deal with the level of trauma that the people have experienced. Seeing your sister being raped right in front of you, being a monk or a priest and seeing innocent children being massacred and slaughtered right in front of your eyes, you don't really know how to process that. And we don't have the professionals to help us, deal with this kind of trauma. So you have an entire generation that doesn't know how to express themselves, that do not know how to handle the emotional turmoil that is happening in their heads. And so Tigray, like I said, though we're very resilient and determined people, we're like in a very dark space where we don't know what to do or how to survive. And I think it's also important to mention that majority of Tigray is still under the illegal occupation of the Eritrean and the Amhara forces, although according to the cessation of hostility agreement, they were supposed to withdraw from all parts of Tigray, but that hasn't happened. So you have people living on the western parts of Tigray, which is the most fertile part of Tigray that connects to Sudan. are still under the illegal occupation of the Amhara forces. And when you go farther to the eastern part of Tigray, they're still under the illegal occupation of the Eritrean forces, where all the crimes that I talked about at the beginning of our conversation are still happening. People are still being raped, people are still being massacred, people are still being starved to death on purpose. So this is the reality on the ground. And we also have about 70,000 refugees who initially made it, out of Tigray and are currently in Sudan. So, they were displaced from their homes, uprooted from their homes due to the Tigray genocide. And now many of them are under this imminent threat because of the conflict that's happening in Sudan. So Tigrayans, wherever we are, we don't seem to have a break.
Um, Tigray is located in Ethiopia. Do you feel that Ethiopians know the details and extent of this genocide? And do you feel that Ethiopians stand in solidarity with Tigrayans?
Unfortunately, no. And it breaks my heart to say this because I was a proud Ethiopian at some point. Many Tigrayans, all of us were proud Ethiopians because Tigray is the bedrock of Ethiopia in terms of history. Tigray is home to the Ark of the Covenant, which proves, the survival of God, like Jesus. If you're Orthodox Christian, that holds really significant place in our faith. Tigray is home to the first African mosque. Tigray is also home to the first place where African people or Black people were able to defeat white colonizers in our entire history. It's called the Battle of Adwa. It's a battle where Black people or Ethiopians altogether fought against Italian occupation and they successfully defeated them. That place happened in Adwa. Adwa became a bloodbath. Adwa became one of the places where heinous massacres took place by the Ethiopian and Eritrean allied forces. So despite the importance of Tigray, there is this deep-rooted hate against its people. Everyone loves our culture, everyone loves our history, everyone loves our land, everyone wants our land, but no one wants the people. And the people of Ethiopia are very much aware of what happened, and they have actively participated, majority of them. And I want to put the blame on the misinformation and disinformation that was pushed not only after November 4th, but even historically. Historically, Tigrayans have been seen as the spoiled brat of the country that were, favored by the government. But the matter of the fact is that we were taken advantage of, even by own local, government representatives. But I don't know where this notion of Tigrayans being chosen came from, but the Ethiopian community, the Ethiopian population at large, is very much aware of what happened and they were okay with it. All of them were made to believe that in order for Ethiopia to develop and to prosper, it was important for the Tigrayans to be eliminated. And they believed that up until, the impact or the spillover impact of the genocide came knocking to their doors. Now, a lot of them seem, to realize that they were wrong, but too late. Over 1 million people have already died, and Tigray as a region has been turned into nothing. So yeah, they were very much aware and they took an active role. Even those who live in the diaspora have contributed financially to buy armaments. Even the priestess, even the imams, all of them were actively blessing the troops that were going to Tigray to commit all sorts of heinous crimes. So they were very much aware of what happened. And even those of us in the diaspora who were trying to raise awareness about what was happening, who were trying to engage in conversation with policymakers, trying to tell them that, what's happening is wrong and you need to do everything you can to end it. We had fellow Ethiopians who were like standing in front of us, telling everyone that we were lying, telling everyone that it was okay, that we had this coming. So yes, they were very much aware, and unfortunately, they didn't stand with the people of Tigray. But now, a lot of them seem to understand that they were wrong. But like I said, not because they felt the pain for Tigrayans, but simply because the spillover impact of over 2 years of conflict is knocking their doors. Inflation has skyrocketed. Ethiopia, as I told you, is not stable. It's not safe to travel. It's not safe to walk on the streets. So now they're saying, we guess we were wrong. So not because they felt bad for the people of Tigray, but because it's affecting them in a way.
I would say to you, how has this genocide affected your life personally? And this is my last question. Why do you do this work? Why do you risk your life to continue supporting the people of Tigray? And what has this cost you?
Um, I think this is one of the most difficult questions. Throughout the last almost, 3 years, I have been leading advocacy on the front lines, and I never had a problem to talk about everything that happens, but it's really hard to talk about personal, how this affects us. Not because my pain is any more than any other Tigrayan, but people like me have the responsibility of, looking or being strong despite the pain that we go through as individuals. So this war has affected me in many ways that I don't even know how to comprehend anymore. It has changed me as a person. I don't have any faith in humanity anymore. I don't believe in any of the principles, the theories that I learned in school. I am an international relations researcher. I used to believe in cooperation and in international institutions, but all of that has been proved to be nothing if you don't have power, if you don't have oil or any sort of, resource that makes you important to global powers, then your life doesn't really matter. So it has shattered my hope in humanity and better future for all of us. But I think it has also affected me in a sense that I have lost many, many family members, including immediate family members, not only because they were Tigrans, but because of my identity and my activism as well. I put a lot more target on their backs, and many of them have paid the ultimate price, including my father. And but I and also even living here in the US, I'm not safe. Many of the advocates who are based here are not safe because we're constantly faced with cyberbullying, harassment, dehumanization, and even assassination attempts here in the US. So Tigrans, wherever we live, we have been targets by the Ethiopian government and its allies. But we keep up fighting because we know we don't have any other option but to keep going because our people have no one but us. So no matter how heavy or costly the price is, we continue to do our best because we have millions and millions of people whose life is really hanging on the line, and they rely on people like me to amplify their plight, find a way to tell their story. We may not be able to save their life, but at least we can tell their story so the world knows what happened to them. And I say this because it's really important that we leave a precedent that protects next generation. I know my activism and my advocacy will not bring back the 8,000 and more than that civilians that were massacred or killed, but I know if I continue to speak up, if we continue to document what happened, if we continue to tell these global leaders this is happening on your watch, maybe we'll be able to protect the next generation of Tigrans. And I also want to leave a good example for any other Ethiopian or African for that matter, that Pan-Africanism or loving your country should focus on its citizens, not on protecting genocidal governments or dictatorial authorities. So that's the other reason. And I say this because feel like people have failed us historically. I Ethiopia has been in border conflict and many other conflicts with its neighbors, including Eritrea. In 1998 and 2000, Ethiopia and Eritrea had border conflict. They had a war that lasted for about 2 years. And during that war, many Tigrayans in particular were attacked single-handedly, like they have been targeted by the Eritrean army, and one of them is my sister. She used to live in Eritrea. She was abducted in the midst of that conflict, and I grew up not knowing her whereabouts. To this very day, I don't know if she's dead or alive. And I don't know if people can understand how difficult it is to live in a world knowing you have a sister that probably is suffering somewhere, but I can't mourn her. I cannot mourn her loss, her days, because I don't know if she's dead. But it's also difficult to keep on hoping that she's alive because it has been such a long time. So living in that uncertainty of what happened to your sister is something that changed who you are. So from a very young age, I have been involved in advocacy and activism in the hopes of, getting some level of support or justice for my sister and for people like her. And this is not a story unique to me. A lot of Tigrans experience similar horrific stories. So I think it's primarily primarily the pain and the suffering that was inflicted on our family members and generations before us that inspires us to keep on fighting, but also hoping that we will be the last group of people to suffer and that we will forge a better future for the generation that will come after us. Because I don't want anyone to have to be as strong as it had to be the past 3 years. I don't want anyone to go through the living hell that the people of Tigray continue to experience. So our fight is inspired by this burning desire of not wanting to see anyone go through what we're going through as a collective. And this is something that keeps us going. I know it's difficult. I know our fight is going to be very long and probably tiring, but this is a purpose, and we'll continue to do everything we can. And it has just changed everything. We no longer know how to be happy. We don't know what the meaning of life is. We wake up and sleep thinking about Tigray and thinking about ways to alleviate the pain of the innocent people that are suffering. And majority of us are people, we're so young. We had so much future ahead of us. We had a lot of potential, but unfortunately, all of our dreams and our hopes have been shattered by this genocidal government. So we're trying our best to make sure no one ever goes through this.
Thank you so much, Meaza. This was a beautiful conversation, and I feel so sad that much of the world does not know what happened to the people of Tigray, but it's so important to continue amplifying this genocide. It is horrific. I cannot imagine the trauma and pain that for the people who are, still alive, and the survivors' guilt that, people in Tigray feel across the diaspora. But I want this to just be the beginning of a conversation of education for people who didn't know about this, but keep learning and keep digging. At On my YouTube channel, I will put on links down below, which I will get from you, Meaza, on like where people can donate, perhaps even books to read, understanding, what kind of pages we should be following to stay up to date on what is happening in Tigray, and really ending this humanitarian crisis, because I think the most important thing right now is ending the man-made starvation that is happening, and how we can help ensure that food gets to people there, ending the blockade and applying pressure on the right organizations to actually bring food into the country. And maybe, Meaza, you and I can work together to actually figure out what organizations we can apply that pressure on. But thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you all for watching.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you giving us the platform. Thank you.